The X570 AORUS Pro Revision 1 is the motherboard that Gigabyte cannot afford to get wrong. It is their most sold AORUS motherboard, and it is competing in the most demanding, crowded and ruthless segment market there is, a pro gamer enthusiast mid-range gaming segment. And you know, I love the Pro series. I had reviewed the Z390 AORUS Pro Revision 1 not so long ago. You should be checking it if you haven't done so just yet. And you know, it was just the best mid-range Intel platform-based motherboard I had reviewed. But the X570 chipset brings so much on the table, and it really changes the whole dimension of mid-range motherboard, both in prices, because it's much more expensive, but in the same time in terms of what it brings, the bandwidth and all the challenges that it does entail. So yeah, by the way, I'm filming from Senegal, and oh my god, it's so hot in here. I'm never gonna survive this. AORUS Pro series is all about performance, gaming, stability, and efficiency. It's a clearer, more focused layout, meaning less features that you might find in its equivalent MSI competitor, but that's also a good thing. It's one of those motherboards where less is more. All right, starting with the obvious. We're dealing with a 6-layered ATX motherboard that is 2 layers more than the X570 AORUS Elite, which I had just reviewed a month and a half ago, and that you should be checking if you haven't done so yet. And that means a better PCIe signal isolation, which is key to the good delivery of PCIe 4th generation level bandwidths, and that is what, you know, the X570 chipset is all about. It is powered by an AM4 CPU supporting both Ryzen 2000 and Ryzen 3000 CPU series. Note that the PCIe 4.0 abilities of this board will only be unlocked when coupled with a Ryzen 3000 CPU. VRM-wise, well, this is where risks were taken. We're dealing with 14 40 amps power stages organized in 6 parallel true phases and 2 SoCs or SoCs. This is 480 amps worth of CPU-centric power, more than you will need to operate or even overclock any Ryzen 3000 series processors in existence, including the 16 physical core 3950X, so that's great. But AORUS made the interesting choice to go with 40 amps power stages, which, you know, is very surprising. I was expecting 50 amps, and that is undoubtedly at least a marketing risk AORUS just took. But 40 amps power stages produce significantly less heat than 50 amps ones, and that is the goal here. And I like that. I like it a lot, because when tested with my 3900X, a 12 physical core count, for one, the VRM never went beyond 75 to 77 degrees Celsius, even overclocked, which is almost incredible, given the fact that we do have 10 power stages placed one next to the other, but that's also thanks to the amazing heatsinks which is coming with this board. AORUS went all in with a pipe-connected dual heatsink block. Most noticeably, we do have a thin radiating block, which usually shows up in more expensive boards. Memory-wise, we have our usual dual channel, able to support up to 128 GB of DDR4 RAM. Coupled with the 2nd generation Ryzen CPU, it is overclockable up to 3.6 GHz, but if coupled with the 3rd generation of Ryzen CPU, it is overclockable up to a whopping 4.4 GHz, and obviously one of the many performance perks you'll get when running a Ryzen 3000 CPU series in conjunction with the X570 chipset, here a much faster memory. Staying in the memory, the X570 AORUS Pro can support up to 2 horizontal M.2 solid-state drives, which coupled with the 2nd generation Ryzen CPU will go as fast as the PCIe 3.0 standard will allow them to go, meaning 32 gigabit per second. But couple the board with a 3rd generation Ryzen CPU and you will unlock the gargantuesque ability of the PCIe 4th generation, which if run with PCIe 4th generation compatible M.2 solid-state drives will allow you to have write and read speeds going all the way up to 64 gigabit per second. Now in both cases, these sticks will hit quite a bit, and that is exactly why we do have these two thick, heavy thermo-padded heat shields, which do a great job at keeping our sticks away from the big, mean thermo-throttling spaghetti monster. A little word on the chipset. Our X570 chipset has twice the heat signatures than its predecessor, which explains the presence of a 60,000 hours graded ball-bearing active cooling solution with the exclusive task of evacuating any excess heat, if any. And I say any because this is a very same heatsink we've seen on the X570 AORUS Elite and the Gigabyte X570 Gaming X. Both I had reviewed, and you should be checking if you haven't done so. Anywho, this is the very best chipset heatsink I've reviewed on X570 motherboards. It's so thick, it's heavy, it's dense. I'm quite certain that it would just do the job without the fan altogether, but it's there. Fine. Export-wise, we have 5 PCIe slots, 2 single-slot single speeds, 3 16 slots with different speeds. Only the closest one to the CPU can operate at full 16 PCIe lane speeds. Therefore, this is where you'd want to place your single GPU for optimal performances. In a dual GPU configuration, our PCIe slots will be sharing bandwidth amongst them, giving us an 8x8 configuration. And our last slot has been capped up to 4 PCIe lanes. Talking of bandwidth, when run with a Ryzen 3000 CPU series, and therefore running this board in a PCIe 4.0 configuration, the available bandwidth per lane doubles, giving us up to 32 GB per second worth of bandwidth on our fastest PCIe slot. And one might think, hey, does that mean that my video card would run twice faster? Oh child. Video cards we have today are still to produce enough bandwidth to bottleneck our good old PCIe 3.0. So even if there is more bandwidth available on the PCIe slot, it's not gonna do you any good. Simply said, whatever video card you're gonna put on there, on a 3rd or 4th generation PCIe, you're not gonna see in-game gaming performance gain. That's for sure. But if you're looking for multiple GPU configuration, that will increase your bandwidth. And if you're looking for PCIe based storage, that's gonna be awesome. And if you're looking for serious future proofing, well, PCIe 4.0 is kind of the way forward. It's gonna be there for at least 5 to 6 years. So yeah, in that context, it's awesome. Now, storage-wise, we do have 6 3rd generation SATA plugs, which at 6 GB of transfer each is there. Boring, but reliable. Back IO-wise, first let me note the presence of an integrated IO plate, which is always a good thing. And starting from the left, we have 4 2nd generation USB plugs, 3 10 gigabit USB plugs including a Type-C, 3 5 gigabit 3.2 USB plugs, a gigabit LAN, an HDMI 1.4 output, and a rather mid-range 8-channel ALC 1220 Realtek codec. Now, AORUS and MSI are the two only manufacturers I know which are using WiMA capacitors, and WiMA capacitors are the best in the industry in terms of signal isolation and protecting your board and your Realtek codec from electrostatic interferences, especially if you don't have a grounded house. So usually I'm not a big fan of integrated audio. Did I say graphics before? I meant audio. And both in playing games and in recording. So if you have WiMA capacitors, as we do here, I wouldn't advise to buy an external audio sound blaster, they still call that. So yeah, big kudos to AORUS for this. On board wise, we have 2 2nd generation USB connectors, 2 5 gigabit front panel connectors, and a 10 gigabit Type-C connectors, which is lovely to see. Next, something I absolutely love and adore, even though it doesn't sound like the sexiest thing in the world, the hybrid fan connectors. Now, usually your fan connectors are here and they're cool and they can do either this or that. Hybrid ones, as we've seen both in, I named them before, the Elite and the Gaming X570 from Gigabyte and AORUS, are a little revolution because they can support everything you'll plug into it. PWM fans, water pump, water flow sensor, CPU fan. It's just so intuitively easier, both in terms of access and in terms of enthusiastness, because you can put 7 water pumps. So basically, if you're gonna go for custom water cooling, this board will be absolutely amazing. Troubleshooting wise, the board does feature an easy debugger, which will... Okay, easy debugger is probably the most difficult word a Frenchman has to pronounce in English. Easy debugger, easy debugger. This feature will guide you in case of fail boot, and that is a must-have when you're running an X570 powered motherboard. With all these bandwidths and extra power and heat, you know, having failed boot is more likely. So yeah, having that will help us out quite a bit. I do regret not having a QLED, even though it's never been there on the AORUS Pro series, but it did not stop Asus to put it on the Strix X570E. So yeah, something that, you know, on the next AMD iteration of this board, I wouldn't mind seeing as well. Finally, this would not be an AORUS motherboard without the life-changing, space-traveling, world-peace solving array of RGB functions. Starting with 2 nested RGB strips, one under the I/O roofing and one embedded into the PCB itself. And because it's never enough, we have an additional 4 RGB Fusion 2nd generation connectors, 2 of which are addressable, conveniently placed in pairs and at both extremities of our board for an easier access. In conclusion, the X570 AORUS Pro Revision 1 will cost you about $260 before taxes, and it's a mid-range motherboard. It's more expensive than your usual Intel-based mid-range motherboard, because obviously the X570 chipset is more expensive in itself and requires more features, PCB, and etc. But this said, it is probably my favorite X570 motherboard. Period. It is a beautifully focused motherboard, brilliantly executed. It's all about performances, stability, and heat efficiency. We have this very powerful VRM configuration, this premium cooling component, in particular the thin array VRM heatsink, which is crucial in long-lasting bandwidth-intensive tasks, as you can see on PCIe 4th generation motherboards. And you know, I'll go back to this idea of focused motherboard, not so many components, a lot of space between each other, and again, for signal interferences and for a long-lasting build, it is really important. And the final point is the hybrid fans. It seems like a small thing. I absolutely love it. It's a small revolution in itself, and I love to see it all around the Gigabyte series of motherboard. I really want to see it on Asus, MSI, and ASRock, and I'm sure they're going to catch up. But the fact that we can run anything on any connectors all around the board is really making the life of enthusiasts so much easier. And now, in short, the X570 AORUS Pro Revision 1 does more, better, and cheaper than all of its natural competition. And that's exactly what Gigabyte had to do to impose this motherboard and to make it a must-buy. And if you are a first-time builder, a pro gamer, or even an enthusiast, this wide spectrum yet focused motherboard is what you need to have. This is where your money needs to be, basically.